What's up, everybody? Corey used Bloody History. So, if you didn't know, on Monday at noon Pacific time, I'm doing JFK birthday conference put on by Lorian Fenton. I'll put a link in the description here. It's like $10 or $11, but you can pay to watch it live. I'm doing 90 minutes, I think. I don't know if I really want to talk that long, but I will. I'm talking about the shooters. Of course, I got to give some background and all that stuff. So today and tomorrow, I'm kind of putting together somewhat of a new slideshow. It'll be good. A bunch of other JFK fucking wannabe researchers are in there. But you know me, I'm just a dick when it comes to that shit. Hey, I have no problem with people being arrogant. But you better be fucking right. So, alright, so enough of that. Let's get on with today's show. We're going to continue on with the ZR rifle analysis. The document came out in October 2017. It's a NARA document. But it's obviously from the 60s or 70s, an analysis of ZR rifle. Alright, summer and fall of 1960. In August of 1960, the United States severed diplomatic relations with the Dominican Republic and recalled most of its personnel. Dearborn was left as consul general and de facto CIA station chief. Consideration was given to providing arms and explosive devices and to the use of high-level emissaries to persuade Trujillo to abdicate. By the end of the year, a broad plan of general support to anti-Trujillo forces both within and without the country was approved. A. Diplomatic development. Withdrawal of U.S. personnel. Events occurring during the summer of 1960 further intensified hemispheric opposition to the Trujillo regime. In June, agents of Trujillo tried to assassinate Venezuelan President Betancourt. As a result, the OAS censured the Trujillo government. At the same time, in August of 1960, the United States broke interrupted diplomatic relations with the Dominican Republic and imposed economic sanctions. With the severance of diplomatic relations, the United States closed its embassy. Most American personnel, including the CIA Chief of Station, left the Dominican Republic. With the departure of the CIA Chief of Station, Dearborn became de facto CIA Chief of Station and was recognized as such by both CIA and State Department. Although on January 20th, 1961, a new CIA Chief of Station came to the Dominican Republic, Dearborn continued to serve as a link to the dissidents. B. Dearborn reports assassination may be only way to overthrow Trujillo regime. Dearborn came to believe that no effort to overthrow the Trujillo government could be successful unless it involved Trujillo's assassination. He communicated this opinion to both the State Department and the CIA. In July of 1960, he advised Assistant Secretary Rubottom that the dissidents were, quote, in no way ready to carry out any type of the revolutionary activity in the foreseeable future except the assassination of their principal enemy. Dearborn to Rubottom, letter 7/14/60. It is uncertain what portion of the information provided by Dearborn to State was passed above the Assistant Secretary level. Through August of 1960, only Assistant Secretary Rubottom, his deputy, Lester Mallory, and a staff assistant, Frank Devine, were within the Latin American division of the department, aware of Dearborn's current projects. Devine to Dearborn, letter 8/15/60. By September of 1960, Thomas Mann had replaced Roy Rubottom as Assistant Secretary for Inter-American Affairs, and Frank Devine had become a special assistant to Mr. Mann. While serving as special assistant to the Assistant Secretary, Devine reportedly spent 90% of his time coordinating state activities in Latin America. It was in this capacity that Devine maintained almost daily communication with redacted and other officials of the CIA's Western Hemisphere Division. There is a asterisk here. It says, Dearborn's candid reporting to State during the summer of 1960 raised concern with the department, and he was advised that certain specific information should more appropriately come through the other channel, presumably CIA communications. Dearborn advised that his cables to State were distributed to at least 19 different recipient offices. Mann solicited Dearborn's comments concerning plans under discussion for forcing Trujillo from power. Dearborn replied in a detailed letter which concluded, quote, one further point which I should probably not even make. From a purely practical standpoint, it will be best for us for the OAS and for Dominican Republic if the Dominicans put an end to Trujillo before he leaves this island. If he has his millions and is a free agent, he will devote his life from exile to preventing stable government in the Dominican Republic, to overturning democratic governments and establishing dictatorships in the Caribbean, and to assassinating his enemies. If I were a Dominican, which thank heaven I'm not, I would favor destroying Trujillo as being the first necessary step in the salvation of my country, and I would regard this, in fact, as my Christian duty. If you recall Dracula, you will remember it was necessary to drive a stake through his heart to prevent a continuation of his crimes. I believe sudden death would be more humane than the solution of Nuncio, who once told me that he thought he should pray that Trujillo would have a long and lingering illness. Dearborn to Man Letter 10/27/60. C. Efforts to convince Trujillo to abdicate. Throughout the fall of 1960, efforts were made on both the diplomatic and economic fronts aimed at pressuring Trujillo into relinquishing control and ideally leaving the Dominican Republic. The use of high-level emissaries, both from within and without the ranks of government, was considered. Special Group Minutes 9/8/60, Man to Dearborn Correspondence 10/10/60. None of the efforts proved successful, and at the end of 1960, Trujillo was still in absolute control. D. CIA Plans of October 1960. A CIA internal memorandum dated October 3rd, 1960, entitled Plans for the Dominican Internal Opposition and Dominican Desk for Overthrow of the Trujillo Government, set forth plans which, quote, have been developed on a tentative basis which appear to be feasible and which might be carried out covertly by CIA with a minimal risk of exposure, end quote. These plans provided in part for the following. A. Delivery of approximately 300 rifles and pistols together with ammunition and a supply of grenades to secure a cache on south shore of the island, about 14 miles east of Ciudad Trujillo. B. Delivery to the same cache described above of an electronic detonation device with remote control features which could be planted by the dissidents in such a manner as to eliminate certain key Trujillo henchmen. This might necessitate training and introducing the country by illegal entry. A trained technician to set the bomb and detonator. Emphasis added. CIA Memorandum 10/3/60. E. December 1960 Special Group Plan of Covert Action. On December 29, 1960, the Special Group considered and approved a broad plan of covert support to anti-Trujillo forces. The plan presented by Bissell envisioned support to both Dominican exile groups and internal dissidents. The exile groups were to be furnished money to organize and undertake anti-Trujillo propaganda efforts and to refurbish a yacht for use in paramilitary activities. Bissell emphasized to the special group that, quote, the proposed action would not of themselves bring about the desired result in the near future, lacking some decisive stroke against Trujillo himself. That's from the Special Group Minutes 12/29/60. 4. January 12, 1961, Special Group approval of, quote, limited supplies of small arms and other material. On January 12, 1961, with all members present, the Special Group met and, according to its minutes, took the following action with respect to the Dominican Republic. Quote, Mr. Merchant explained the feeling of the Department of State that limited supplies of small arms and other material should be made available for dissidents inside the Dominican Republic. Mr. Parrott said that we believe this can be managed securely by CIA and that the plan would call for final transportation into the country being approved by the dissidents themselves. The group approved the project. Special Group Minutes 112/61. A. Memoranda underlying the Special Group action. On January 12, 1961, Thomas Mann sent a memorandum to Undersecretary Livingston Merchant. The memorandum, sent through Joseph Scott, Merchant's special assistant, reported on the disillusionment of Dominican dissidents with the United States for its failure to furnish them with any tangible or concrete assistance. Further, it reported opposition Clemens have consistently asked us to supply them with hardware of various types. This has included quantities of conventional arms, and also rather persistently they have asked for some of the more exotic items and devices which they associate with revolutionary effort. Man to Merchant memo of 112/61. There's an asterisk here. The members of the special group were, at the time, Livingston Merchant, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Gordon Gray, Advisor to the President for National Security Affairs, John N. Irwin, Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Alan Dulles, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Mann suggested for Merchant's consideration and, if he approved, for discussion by the special group, the provision of token quantities of selected items desired by the dissidents. Mann specifically mentioned small explosive devices which would place somehow sabotage potential in the hands of dissident elements, but stated that there would be no thought of toppling the GODR, Government of Dominican Republic, by any such minor measure, end quote. Mann to Merchant Memo 11261. This memorandum was drafted on January 11th by Mann's special assistant for CIA liaison, Frank Devine. A covering memorandum from Scott to Merchant forwarding Mann's memo was apparently taken by Merchant to the special group meeting. Merchant's handwritten notations indicate that the special group, quote, agreed in terms of Tom Mann's memo, and that the Secretary of State was informed of the decision by late afternoon on January 12, 1961. Scott to Merchant Memo 11261. There is no evidence that any member of the special group other than Allen Dulles knew that the dissidents had clearly and repeatedly expressed a desire for arms and explosives to be used by them in assassination efforts. While it is of course possible that such information was passed orally to some or all of the members of the special group and perhaps was even discussed by them on January 1261, there is no documentary evidence of which the committee is aware which has established this to be the case. We have an asterisk here. It says various CIA cables, including those details with the sniper rifles, indicate that the copies were sent to the DCI, Allen Dulles. On January 19, 1961, the last day of the Eisenhower administration, the Consul General Dearborn was advised that approval had been given for supplying arms and other material to the Dominican dissidents. That's headquartered to Station Cable 11961. Shortly thereafter, Dearborn informed Devine that the dissidents were delighted about the decision to deliver exotic equipment. Dearborn to Devine Cable 13161. 5. January 20th, 61 to April 17th, 61. The Kennedy administration threw the Bay of Pigs. On January 20th, 1961, the Kennedy administration took office. 3 of the 4 members of the special group, all except for Allen Dulles, retired. Prior to the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion on April 17, 1961, a number of significant events occurred. These events included meetings with Dominican dissidents in which specific assassination plans were discussed, requests by dissidents for explosive devices, the passage by U.S. officials of pilots and carbines to dissidents inside the Dominican Republic, and the poaching of to the Dominican Republic of machine guns, which had been requested by the dissidents for use in connection with an assassination attempt. We have an asterisk. As indicated in the post-Bay of Pigs section, infra permission to pass those machine guns was denied and the guns were never passed. These events are discussed below under subheading A. Evidence reflecting the degree of knowledge of those events possessed by senior American officials is treated thereafter. As used herein, quote, senior American officials means individuals in the White House or serving as members of the special group. A. Specific events indirectly linking U.S. to dissidents' assassination plans. 1. Assassination discussions and requests for explosives. At meetings held with dissident leaders in New York City on February 10th and 15th, 1961, CIA officials were told repeatedly by dissident leaders that the key to success of the plot to overthrow Trujillo regime would be the assassination of Trujillo. CIA memo for the record 21361. Among the requests made by CIA ex-dissident leaders were the following. A. Ex-FBI agents who would plan and execute the death of Trujillo. B. Cameras and other items that could be used to fire projectiles. C. A slow-working chemical that could be rubbed on the palm of one's hand and transferred to Trujillo in a handshake, causing delayed lethal results. Silencers for rifles that could kill from a distance of several miles. Other methods of assassinating Trujillo proposed by dissidents at the February 10th or February 15th meetings included poisoning Trujillo's food or medicines, ambushing his automobile, and attacking him with firearms and grenades. That's from CIA memo for the record 213 and 21661. The dissidents', quote, latest plot, as described in the February CIA memoranda, was said to involve the planting of a powerful bomb which could be detonated from a nearby electric device along the route of Trujillo's evening walk. On March 13th, 61, a dissident in the Dominican Republic asked for fragmentation grenades, quote, for use during the next week or so. This request was communicated to CIA headquarters on March 14th, 1961, and followed the next day by an additional request for 50 fragmentation grenades, 5 rapid-fire weapons, and 10 64mm anti-tank rockets. This further request was also passed on to CIA headquarters. stationed to headquarters cable 31561. There's no evidence that any of these arms were supplied to the dissidents. The documentary record makes clear that Frank Devine at the State Department was also advised of related developments. In a March 16, 1961 panic letter from Dearborn, who complained that his spirits were in the doldrums because, quote, the members of our club are now prepared in their minds to have a picnic, but do not have the ingredients for the salad. Lately, they have developed a plan for the picnic, which just might work if they could find the proper food. They have asked us for a few sandwiches, hardly more, and we are not prepared to make them available. Last week, we were asked to furnish 3 or 4 pineapples for a party in the near future, but I could remember nothing in my instruction that would have allowed me to contribute this ingredient. I don't think I was tempted, but I have rather specific guidelines to the effect that salad ingredients will be delivered outside the picnic grounds and will be brought to the area by another club. Dearborn letter to Devine. As an asterisk here, says there is no record the CIA responded affirmatively to any of these requests, and the CIA officer who drafted the February 13th memorandum stated the view that some of the questions raised by the dissidents did not require an answer. After reviewing his picnic letter, together with the requests in the March 14th and 15th cables discussed above, Dearborn concluded during his testimony before the committee that the pineapples were probably the requested fragmentation grenades, and the restriction on delivering salad ingredients outside of the picnic grounds was almost certainly meant to refer to the requirements of the January 12th special group order that the arms be delivered outside the Dominican Republic. Dearborn 729, page 25 and 27. 2. The passage of pistols. A. Poaching to the Dominican Republic. In March 15th, 1961 cable, Chief of Station Redacted reported that Dearborn had asked for 3 .38 caliber pistols for issue to several dissidents. In reply, headquarters cable regret no authorization exists to suspend poach regulations against shipment of arms, as indicated that their reply had been coordinated with state. Headquarters to Station Cable 31761. The station chief then asked headquarters to seek the necessary authorization and noted that at his last 2 posts he had received pistols via the poach for worthy purposes, and therefore he knew it could be done. Station to Headquarters Cable 32161. 2 days later, headquarters cabled that pistols and ammunition were being poached. However, the station chief was not instructed to advise Dearborn, or was instructed to not advise Dearborn. Headquarters to Station Cable 32461. B. Reason for the CIA instruction not to tell Dearborn. Owen testified that he believed that "don't tell Dearborn the pistol is being poached" language is simply meant that the sending of firearms through the diplomatic pouch was not something to be unnecessarily discussed. Dearborn said he never doubted the pouch was used, but since he knew Owen had no other means of receiving weapons. Were the pistols related to assassination? Dearborn testified that he had asked for a single pistol for purposes completely unrelated to any assassination consideration. He said he'd been approached by a Dominican contact who lived in a remote area and was concerned for safety of his family in the event of political reprisals. Dearborn testified that he believed the man's fears were well-founded and he had promised to seek a pistol. We have a asterisk here. The Inspector General's report issued in connection with the review of these events concludes that, quote, there is no indication that the MD'd operational files that the pistols were actually pouched. The request for pistols appears to have been overtaken by a subsequent request for submachine guns. IG's report, page 60. This conclusion is difficult to understand in light of the March 24, 61 headquarters to station cable, which provides C. Poaching revolvers and ammo request TRUJ 0462 on March 28th. Do not advise named Dearborn deleted this material poached. Explanation follows. Although there was no direct evidence linking any of these pistols to the assassination of Trujillo on June 7th, 1961 CIA memorandum unsigned with no attribution as to source states that 2 of the 3 pistols were passed by redacted to Lorenzo Wimpy Berry, a United States citizen who was in direct contact with the action element of the dissident group. It should also be noted that the assassination was apparently conducted with almost complete reliance upon hand weapons. Whether one or more of these .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistols eventually came into the hands of the assassins, and if so, whether they were used in connection with the assassination remains open questions. I'm sorry, I'm fucking laughing my ass off here because They're trying to deny that they had anything to do with the assassination of Trujillo, except the fact that they were in contact with the dissidents and the fact that the dissidents asked for weapons. And in fact, we gave them weapons. And in fact, that Trujillo was killed by the dissidents with some small caliber handguns. And we just happened to slip them a couple small caliber handguns. But yet they're talking about, we still don't think that they had anything to do with the assassination. Are you fucking kidding me? Oh my God, it's fucking unbelievable. Both Dearborn and Redacted testified that they regarded the pistols as weapons for self-defense purposes, and they never considered them in any way connected with the then current assassination plans. Dearborn 729, page 70, and Owen, page 38 and 73. However, none of the headquarters cables inquired as to the purpose for which the handguns were sought, and Redacted cable stated only Dearborn wanted them for passage to dissidents. That's from the station to headquarter cable 31561. We have a asterisk here. It says Dearborn is clear in his recollection that he asked Redacted to request only one pistol. Dearborn 729, page 3031. Redacted, on the other hand, testified that if this cable requested 3 pistols for Dearborn, then Dearborn must have asked for 3 pistols. Owen, page 72. The pistols were, however, apparently sent in one package, headquarters to station cables 32761 and 32461, and Dearborn testified that what he believed to be one gun came wrapped up and that he passed it. These motherfuckers can't even keep their own story straight to each other. All right, indeed, the March 24th, 1961 cable advising that the pistols were being poached is the very cable which was sent in response to the request by the dissidents for machine guns to be used in an assassination effort, which had been previously described to headquarters. As with the carbines discussed below, it appears that little, if any, concern was expressed within the agency over passing these weapons to would-be assassins. 3. Passing of the carbines. Is it carbines or carbines? I could never know that. I never knew the answer to that. A. Request by Redacted and Dearborn and approval by CIA. In a March 26, 61 cable to CIA headquarters, Redacted asked for permission to pass the dissidents 330 caliber M1 carbines. The guns have been left behind in the consulate by Navy personnel after the U.S. broke formal diplomatic relations in August of 60. Dearborn testified that he knew of and concurred in the proposal to supply the carbines to the dissidents. Dearborn, page 42 and 43, dated 7/29. On March 31st, 61, CIA headquarters cable approved the request to pass the carbines. Headquarters to station cable 33161. Were the carbines related to the assassination? The carbines were passed to the action group contact Wimpy Berry on April 7th, 1961. Station headquarters cable 4861. Eventually, they found their way into the hands of one of the assassins, Antonio de la Maza. Both Dearborn and Redacted testified that the carbines were at all times viewed as strictly a token show of support, indicating U.S.'s support of the dissidents' efforts to overthrow Trujillo. Hang on a second. Let me just make sure I fucking read this correctly. Eventually, they found their way into the hands of one of the assassins, Antonio de la Maza. Okay, so the fucking carbines that they allowed to be passed ended up in the hands of one of Trujillo's assassins. This is unfucking believable, these fucking people. Both Dearborn and Redacted testified that the carbines were at all times viewed as strictly a token show of support, indicating U.S. support of the dissidents' efforts to overthrow Trujillo. Oh my, it's fucking, do you understand why I'm so frustrated with this? See, failure to disclose to State Department officials in Washington. There's no indication that the request or passage of the carbines was disclosed to State Department officials in Washington until several weeks after the passage. In fact, on April 5th, headquarters requested its station to ask Dearborn not to comment. In correspondence with state, the carbines and ammunition were being passed to the dissidents. This cable was sent while Redacted was in Washington, and it indicated that upon his return to the Dominican Republic, he would explain the request. The station replied that Dearborn had not commented on the carbines and ammunition in his correspondence with state, and he realized the necessity not to do so. Dearborn testified, however, that he believed at the time of his April 6th cable that someone in the State Department had been consulted in advance and had approved the passage of the carbines. 3. Requests for and poaching of the machine guns. A redacted request machine guns for use in the assassination. Station chief suggested that headquarters consider M3 machine guns on February 10, 61. The request was raised again in March, but no action was taken. On March 20th, 61, redacted cabled a dissident request for 5 M3 or comparable machine guns, specifying their wish that the arms be sent via diplomatic poach or similar means. The dissidents were said to feel that delivery by airdrop or transfer at sea would overly tax their resources. The machine guns sought by the dissidents were clearly identified in redacted cable as being sought for use in connection with an attempt to assassinate Trujillo. This plan was to kill Trujillo in the apartment of his mistress, and according to redacted cable, quote, they do need 5 M3 or comparable machine guns and 1,500 rounds of ammo for personal defense. In event of firefight, we'll use quiet weapons for basic job. In essence, CIA's response was that the timing for an assassination was wrong. Redacted was told that precipitous or uncoordinated action could lead to the emergence of a leftist Castro-type regime, and the, quote, mere disposal of Trujillo may create more problems than solutions. It was headquarters' position that, quote, we should attempt to avoid precipitous action by the internal dissidents until opposition group and headquarters are better prepared to support assassination effect, a change in regime, and cope with the aftermath. The cable also stated that headquarters was prepared to deliver machine guns and ammunition to the dissidents when they developed the capability to receive them, but that security considerations precluded use of U.S. facilities as a carrier. Soon thereafter, on April 6th of 61, while Redacted was in Washington for consultation with headquarters, he reported on events in the Dominican Republic and especially on the instance of the EMOF dissident leaders, that they be provided with a limited number of small arms for their own protection, specifically 5 M3 caliber 45 SMGs. CIA memo for the record 41161. Poaching the machine guns is approved by Bissell. According to an April 7, 61 memo, restriction waiver request and certification was submitted seeking permission to poach 4 M3 machine guns and 240 rounds of ammunition on a priority basis for issuance to a small action group to be used for self-protection. The request submitted on behalf of the Chief Western Hemisphere Division further provided, B, a determination has been made that the issuance of this equipment to the action group is desirable if for no other reason than to assure its important groups continued cooperation with and confidence in this agency's determination to live up to its earlier commitments to the group. These commitments took the form of advising the group in January of 61 that we would provide limited arms and assistance to them provided they developed the capability to receive it. Operational circumstances have prevented this group from developing the assets capable of receiving the above equipment through normal clandestine channels, such as airdrops or sea infiltration. The waiver request was approved by Richard Bissell as Deputy Director of Plans on April 10th of 1961. The machine guns were poached into the Dominican Republic and were received at the station on April 1961. On April 10th, Walter Elder, Assistant Director, had issued a memorandum which stated, quote, Mr. Dulles wants no action on drops of leaflets or arms in the Dominican Republic taken without his approval. It's from the Elder Memorandum of 41061. The Elder Memorandum suggests that Dulles did not know that an airdrop of arms was regarded as unfeasible and that poaching had been approved. B, knowledge of senior American officials pre-Bay of Pigs. On February 14th, 1961, prior to the passage of weapons, but a month after the generalized approval of the passage of arms by the prior administration, a meeting of the special group was held with Messrs. McNamara, Gilpatrick, Bowles, Bundy, Dulles, Bissell, and General Cabell in attendance. The minutes state that, quote, Mr. Dulles, assisted by Mr. Bissell, then summarized for the benefit of the new members of the special group the specific actions taken by the predecessor group during the past year, and also the list of significant projects which antedate the beginning of 1960 and which it is planned to continue. Special group minutes of 2/14/61. In the course of the discussion, the following point, among others, was made. Dominican Republic, Mr. Bundy asked that a memorandum be prepared for higher authority on the subject of what plans can be made for a successor government of Trujillo. The request attributed to Bundy suggests that the Dominican Republic had been one of the matters on which Dulles and Bissell briefed the new members. What is unclear from the February 14th minutes, just as unclear from the January 12th minutes, is the degree to which the special group was informed concerning the means by which the dissidents planned to accomplish the overthrow of the Trujillo regime. Specifically, it is not known if the new members of the special group were told that the dissident group had expressed the desire to assassinate Trujillo. Nor is it known if the special group was advised that the State Department representative in the Dominican Republic had made the assessment that the Dominican government could not be overthrown without the assassination of Trujillo. Bissell testified that he had no clear recollection of the details of the February 14th briefing, and he was unable to say whether or not the method of overthrow to be attempted by the dissidents was discussed. Robert McNamara, one of the new members of the special group in attendance for the briefing, has no recollection as to the specificity in which the Dominican Republic was discussed at the February 14th meeting. He does not recall any mention by either Dulles or Bissell of dissident plans to assassinate Trujillo. That's from the McNamara affidavit. February memoranda. The Secretary of State sent the President a memoranda on February 15th, 1961, in response to a request concerning progress to assure an orderly takeover should Trujillo fall. The memorandum advised that, quote, our representatives in the Dominican Republic have, at considerable risk to those involved, established contacts with numerous leaders of the underground opposition, and the CIA has recently been authorized to arrange for delivery to them outside the Dominican Republic of small arms and sabotage equipment. This reference to recent authorization for delivery of arms indicates that Secretary Rusk had received some briefing concerning events in the Dominican Republic and the January 1961 special group decision to provide arms to anti-Trujillo elements. Assistant Secretary for Inter-American Affairs Thomas Mann, Deputy Assistant Secretary William Coerr, Coerr, and Special Assistant Frank Devine continued in their respective positions throughout the transition period. The committee has been furnished no documents indicating that Secretary Rusk or Undersecretary Bowles were specifically advised as to the intentions of the Dominican dissidents to kill Trujillo, intentions of which the Bureau of Inter-American Affairs certainly had knowledge. Indeed, Secretary Rusk testified that he was not personally so advised. On February 17, 1961, Richard Bissell sent a briefing paper on the Dominican Republic to McGeorge Bundy, President Kennedy's national security advisor. Here we have another contact with McGeorge Bundy, a month now after his conversation with Richard Bissell the first time, right, which was January 61. The paper made note of the outstanding special group approval for the provision of arms and equipment to the Dominican dissidents and states that the dissidents had been informed that the U.S. was prepared to provide such arms and equipment as soon as they developed the capability to receive them. The briefing paper also indicated that dissident leaders had informed CIA of their plan of action, which they felt could be implemented if they were provided with arms for 300 men, explosives, and remote-controlled detonation devices. Various witnesses have testified, however, that supplying arms for 300 men would stand alone indicate a non-targeted use for the arms, i.e. a paramilitary or revolutionary implementation as opposed to specifically targeted assassination use. Concerning the briefing paper, Bissell testified that, quote, it is perfectly clear that I was aware that at the time of the memorandum to Mr. Bundy that these dissident groups were and had for a long time been hoping they could accomplish the assassination of Trujillo. As a matter of fact, the request since some 7 or 8 months earlier was perfectly clear indication of that, so the fact was not new knowledge. When asked why the memorandum did not include the fact that the dissidents intended to assassinate Trujillo, Bissell replied, I cannot tell you, Mr. Chairman. I do not remember what considerations moved me. I don't know whether it was because this was common knowledge or it seemed to me unnecessary to include it, or, as you're implying, there was an element of concealment here. I would be very surprised if it were the latter in this case. In response to questions concerning the lack of information in the February 17, 61 briefing paper concerning the uses of which the requested arms might likely be put by the dissidents, Bissell stated, quote, I would say that the agency's failure, if there be a failure here, was not to state in writing that the plans of the dissidents would include assassination attempts. Bissell's briefing paper for Bundy included with the assessment that a violent clash might soon occur between Trujillo and the internal opposition, quote, which will end either with the liquidation of Trujillo and his cohorts or with a complete roll-up of the internal opposition. In this regard, the fear was expressed that the existing schedules for the delivery of weapons to the internal opposition might not be sufficiently timely, and it was therefore recommended that consideration be given to catching the requested arms and other material. Bissell to Bundy Memo, 2/17/61. Thus, by the middle of February 61, the senior members of the new administration, and in view of the, quote, for higher authority nature of Bundy's request, presumably President Kennedy himself, were aware of the outstanding special group approval for the passage of arms and other materials to opposition elements within the Dominican Republic. There was no modification or rescission of the inherited special group approval, and it would seem fair, therefore, to regard the approval as having been at least acquiesced in by the new administration. During March and early April of 1961, operational levels within both the CIA and State Department learned of increasingly detailed plans by the dissidents to assassinate Trujillo. There's no evidence that this information was passed to the White House or to any member of the special group, except for Allen Dulles. Similarly, there's no evidence that the passage of the pistols or the carbines or the pouching of machine guns to the Dominican Republic was disclosed to anyone outside the CIA during this period. 6. April 17th, 61 to May 31st, 61. The Bay of Pigs through the Trujillo assassination. Jesus fucking Christ. I didn't realize that these two events were so close together. These fucking people were lunatics. These people were fucking lunatics, let me tell you. They fucking had the failed Bay of Pigs event, and so they go and assassinate Trujillo on a month later. Fragile egos at play here. Following the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion, attempts were made by state and CIA representatives in the Dominican Republic to dissuade the dissidents from a precipitous assassination attempt. These efforts to halt the assassination of Trujillo were the result of instructions from CIA headquarters and were prompted by concern over filling the power vacuum which would result from Trujillo's death. The machine guns arrived in the Dominican Republic, but permission to pass them to the dissidents was never given, and the guns were never left the consulate. Dearborn returned to Washington for consultation, and contingency plan for the Dominican Republic was drafted. 2 days before Trujillo's assassination, Dearborn received a cable of instruction and guidance from President Kennedy. The cable advised that the U.S. must not run the risk of association with political assassination, since the U.S., as a matter of general policy, could not condone assassination. The cable further advised Dearborn to continue to hold open offers of material assistance to the dissidents and to advise them of U.S. support for them if they were successful in overthrowing the Trujillo government. The cables also reconfirmed the decision not to pass the machine guns. A. Decision not to pass machine guns and unsuccessful U.S. attempt to stop assassination effort. Oh, God. The fucking lies just overfloweth. By April 17th, 61, the Bay of Pigs invasion operation was a failure. As a result, there developed a general realization that precipitous action should be avoided in the Dominican Republic until Washington was able to give further consideration to the consequences of a Trujillo overthrow and the power vacuum which would be created. A cable from headquarters to the station on April 17, 61 advised that it was most important that the machine guns not be passed without additional headquarter approval. The machine guns arrived in the Dominican Republic on April 19, 1961, and headquarters was so advised. The earlier admonition that the machine guns should be held in station custody until further notice was repeated in a second station cable from headquarters sent April 20th, 1961. This decision was said to have been based on judgment that filling a vacuum created by assassination now bigger questions than ever view unsettled conditions in the Caribbean area. Headquartered to station cable 42061, the dissidents continued to press for the release of the machine guns, and their requests were passed on to headquarters in cables from Dearborn and redacted. Station to headquarters cables 42561. On April 25th, 1961, redacted advised headquarters that Wimpy Berry had informed him that Antonio de la Maza was going to attempt the assassination between April 29th and May 2nd. Redacted also reported that this attempt would use 3 carbines passed from the American consulate, together with whatever else was available. In response to the April 26th cable, headquarters restated that there was no approval to pass any additional arms to the dissidents and requested redacted to advise the dissidents that the United States was simply not prepared at the time to cope with the aftermath of assassination. See CS Comments Station Headquarters 42761. The following day, April 2761, redacted replied, were based upon further discussions with the dissidents, quote, we doubt statements U.S. government now not prepared to cope with aftermath will dissuade them from attempt. Station Headquarter Cable 42761. Dearborn recalls receiving instructions that an effort be made to turn off an assassination attempt, testified that efforts to carry out the instructions were unsuccessful. In effect, the dissidents informed him that this was their affair and it could not be turned off to suit the convenience of the U.S. government. On April 30th, 61, Dearborn advised headquarters that the dissidents had reported to him the assassination attempt was going to take place during the first week of May. The action group was reported to have in its possession 3 carbines, 4 to 6 12-gauge shotguns, and other small arms. Although they still reportedly wanted the submachine guns, Dearborn advised headquarters that the group was going to go ahead with what they had, whether the U.S. wanted them to or not. Dearborn's cable set forth the argument of the action group that since the U.S. had already assisted the group to some extent and was therefore implicated, the additional assistance of releasing the machine guns would not change the basic relationship. The cable concluded, quote, owing to far-reaching political implications involved in release or non-release of requested items, headquarters may wish to discuss foregoing with State Department. B. Further consideration of passing machine guns. In response, a cable was drafted at CIA headquarters authorizing passage of the machine guns. The cable, which was sent to Allen Dulles with Bissell's recommendation for it in dispatch, provided, quote, since it appears that opposition group has committed itself to action with or without additional support, coupled with the fact reference C items the carbines already made available to them for personal defense station authorized passage, reference A items the machine guns to opposition member for their additional protection on their proposed endeavor, end quote. Draft of headquarters to station cable 5261. That cable was never sent. In his testimony before the committee, Bissell characterized his reasoning for recommending release of the machine guns as follows, quote, having made already a considerable investment in this dissident group and its plans that we might as well make the following investment. On the following day, May 3rd, 61, Ray Herbert, Deputy Chief of the Western Hemisphere Division of CIA, who frequently acted as liaison with the State Department in matters concerning covert operations in the Dominican Republic, met with Adolph Burl, Chairman of the State Department's Interagency Task Force in Latin America. A Burl memorandum of the meeting states that Herbert informed Burl that a local group in the Dominican Republic wished to overthrow Trujillo and sought arms for that purpose. The memorandum continued, quote, on cross-examination, it developed that the real plan was to assassinate Trujillo, and they wanted guns for that purpose. Herbert wanted to know what the policy should be. I told him I could not care less for Trujillo, and this was a general sentiment, but we did not wish to have anything to do with any assassination plots anywhere, anytime. Herbert said he felt the same way. Burl, Memo of Conversation, 5361. Copies of Burl's memorandum were sent to Wimberley Corps, the acting assistant secretary for Inter-American Affairs, and to Special Assistant Frank Devine. Both Herbert and Devine, who had been in almost daily contact with each other since August of 60, had been advised of the assassination plans of the dissident group. In fact, Herbert, along with Bissell, had signed off on the proposed cable of May 2nd, releasing the machine guns for passage. C. Special group meetings of May 4th and May 18th, 1961. On the day following the Burl-Herbert meeting, the special group met, and according to the minutes, quote, the DCI referred to recent reports of the new anti-Trujillo plot. He said, we never know if one of these is going to work or not, and asked what is the status of contingency planning should the plot come off. Mr. Bundy said that at this point is covered in the Cuba paper, which will be discussed at a high level in the very near future. Special group minutes 5461. Once again, the cryptic reporting of the special group minutes makes subsequent analysis as to the scope of matters discussed speculative. It is not known to what extent and what detail Allen Dulles referred to the recent reports of a new anti-Trujillo plot. Certainly in the most recent reports of such plot was Dearborn's April 30th cable disclosing an imminent assassination attempt potentially utilizing U.S.-supplied weapons. On May 18th, 61, the special group again considered the situation in the Dominican Republic, and according to the minutes, quote, Cabell, Deputy DCI, noted that the internal dissidents were pressing for the release of them of certain small arms now in U.S. hands in the Dominican Republic. He inquired whether the feeling of the group remained that these arms should not be passed. The members showed no inclination to take a contrary position at this time. That's from the special group minutes, 5/18/61. D. Final request by dissidents for machine guns. On May 16, 1961, Dearborn cabled the State Department, attention Acting Assistant Secretary Corps, with an urgent request from the dissidents for the machine guns. The cable advised that the assassination attempt was scheduled for the night of May 16th, and that while the chances of success were 80%, provision of the machine guns would reduce the possibility of failure. The dissidents reportedly stressed to Dearborn that if the effort failed due to U.S. refusal to supply the machine guns, the U.S. would be held responsible and would never be forgiven. Dearborn reported that he had informed the dissidents that, based on recent conversations in Washington, he was reasonably certain that authorization could not be obtained for handing over the machine guns. A return cable from the State Department to Dearborn sent the same day confirmed Dearborn's judgment. It instructed him to continue to take the same line until he received contrary instructions, which clearly indicated they had been cleared in advance by the State Department itself. This cable from State was approved under Secretary Bowles, Department to Dearborn 5/16/61. Ray Herbert referred to Dearborn's May 16 request in a memorandum he sent to Devine on the same date and asked to be advised as to the department's policy concerning passage of the machine guns. Herbert noted that when this request was last taken to the department, Burl made the decision that weapons not be passed. Memo to ARA from CIA 5/16/61. Devine responded to Herbert's memorandum on the same day, that advising Herbert that the State Department's policy continued to be negative on the matter of passing the machine guns. Herbert's attention was directed to the January 12, 1961 special group. Devine responded to Herbert's memorandum on the same day, advising Herbert that the department's policy continued to be negative on the matter of passing the machine guns. Herbert's attention was directed to the January 12, 1961 special group limitation concerning the passage of arms outside of the Dominican Republic. A copy of Devine's memorandum to Herbert was forwarded to the office under the Secretary of State to the attention of his personal assistant, Joseph Scott. Devine to Herbert Memo 5/16/61. E. Dearborn in Washington for consultation, drafting of the contingency plans. At a meeting of the National Security Council on May 5, 1961, the question of U.S. policy toward the Dominican Republic was considered, and it was, quote, agreed that the task force on Cuba would prepare promptly both emergency and long-range plans for anti-communist intervention in the event of crises in Haiti or the Dominican Republic. Noted the president's view that the United States should not initiate the overthrow of Trujillo before we knew what government would succeed him, and that any action against Trujillo should be multilateral. Although the precise dates are uncertain, Dearborn was recalled to Washington to participate in the drafting of these contingency plans and recommendations. Dearborn was in Washington at least from May 10th through May 13th, 1961. While in Washington, Dearborn met with State Department personnel and with Richard Goodwin and Arthur Schlesinger of the White House staff. When testifying before the committee, he was unable to recall the substance of his discussions with Goodwin and Schlesinger, aside from his general assumption that the current situation in the Dominican Republic was discussed. He did not recall any discussion with Goodwin or Schlesinger concerning arms, either those which had been passed to the dissidents or those which were being sought. Dearborn left the meeting at the White House, however, with the firm impression that Goodwin had been reviewing cable traffic between Washington and the Dominican Republic and was very familiar with the events as they then stood. All right, we're going to wrap it up here for today. We're on page 62 of 210, and we shall be back on Monday. Thank you for tuning in, guys.